Former manager ends my job at the company I loved. I helped end his career in local tech forever. This is my first one of these. I hope it qualifies. Apologies for this being so long, but I've had to keep this story to myself for more than a decade. Ironically, a recent court ruling means I'm now free to discuss the details publicly for the first time without penalty. I'm starting with here. 1. The background.
I worked at a very big tech company for a very long time, like decades. Over the years I had worked my way up from being a N00B to a kind of specialist fixer. I became fairly well known internally as a security emergency response person. I got assigned the bad or unfixable projects, many of which made news headlines. I have many stories that I can never tell publicly, sadly. Suffice it to say that multiple senior vice presidents in various divisions got to know who I was, because I effectively wrangled gnarly and complex problems and herded many intense tech nerds together to resolve big things in multiple divisions over the years. It was so fun. At the time of our story, I was working on a small security team in a product engineering division. It was a somewhat turbulent time, and our team of 8 had weathered multiple reorganizations and had so many manager changes. It was a lot. But we kept our heads down and did the work, and we all got along just fine. Sidebar, and relevant later, one of the better managers assigned to run our team immediately assigned me a huge and complicated and urgently important project to manage. It would involve people in 6 different divisions, had seriously big legal implications, and our senior VP wanted it to happen by an aggressive deadline within like 4 to 6 weeks. Oh, and my manager was leaving imminently on a long-planned vacation, so he apologetically would be away for the next 3 weeks and unable to assist. The project was to do something big and technical and which had never been done before, so no one was entirely sure how to do it, who all it would require, what steps in what order. Some of the key players had what we gently called difficult personalities. And oh, by the way, it would definitely make international news and cause a ripple in the industry when we did it. No big whoop. Manager was a decent guy and he felt bad about leaving me with this thorny mess. I did it. We got all the people from all the divisions in a room and mapped it all out on a whiteboard. It took days, and hashed out how to do it before the deadline, actually well before, for bonus points. And we lined everyone up to get it done. Before we pulled the actual trigger on the very big thing, I had to attend a meeting with the VP and exec leadership, several levels of management above me, and with the legal team to present the plan and to assure all of the execs that we were ready and had it all handled. So I looked the VP in the eye and assured him that I got this. And then I did. The team did the big thing sooner than the deadline. It was flawless. We rocked that. W00T. Just another day at the office. Tongue sticking out. 2. The inept manager. A few months after that epic project, our good manager left us for another role and someone new moved over from an unrelated division out of nowhere. We'll call him inept manager. Inept manager did not know anything about security. He did not know anything about emergency response. He didn't know anything about what our division did. In fact, no one on our team had ever heard of this guy. He was that worst kind of middle manager, self-important, dismissive of everyone, cares most about appearances and ego, micromanages stuff he doesn't comprehend, and just makes everything worse. But he apparently knows people, and those people get him job assignments because of politics. Loyalty? He certainly didn't have any skills or experience for our team. That guy is the worst. One of inept manager's many weird quirks was that he didn't think it was appropriate for our team to disagree with or correct each other in front of other people. Things in tech, specifically product development, move pretty quickly, and things change all the time. So if some of our team was meeting with someone from another team, and someone something like, so we decided to make the sky green, and we're on schedule, and someone else on our team chimed in to say, actually that's changed, we decided that the sky is now going to be blue, and we pushed the deadline back 2 weeks, that just happened in an earlier meeting. Oh, okay, cool. Inept manager would interrupt and say, we clearly need to get on the same page, let's end this meeting right now and reschedule when my team has all the facts straight. What? That's insane. We'd literally never have ANY meetings if we waited until everyone knew all of the same information all the time. Other teams would routinely leave meetings with us with inaccurate info which affected release schedules, resources. It was just a mess. 3. Inept manager hostility. Shortly after inept manager became our manager, he started being really hostile to me. Not to everyone on the team. Just me. As far as I knew, I hadn't done or said anything to earn his hostility. Suddenly, after 20+ years at this company, I could do nothing right. While this jerk didn't actually understand most of what my job was, he was sure I wasn't doing it right. And he was quick to tell me so, and often in front of others. To the point that my coworkers would take me aside to ask WTAF was going on. I didn't know either. The thing is, I was the only woman on the team. And I have a disability. Now I've been through some things working in high tech over those decades. It was very much an old boys club back then. And meh, I was fine. I'm not one to claim discrimination at the drop of a hat or for no reason. However, when I was trying to piece together the cause of this dude's hostility, some of his comments were sexist and not at all subtle. He also didn't like that due to my disability, and frankly, my seniority, I was given one of the few offices with a door on it in our new building. The rest of our team was in open floor plan cubicles which everyone hated. He was incensed that I, a lowly direct report, and woman, got an office and he didn't. I had more seniority than just about anyone, so even without my disability I'd have scored the office ahead of him. Note that other men in our division got offices too, because again, seniority, and that bothered him less. But I was the only woman on our floor with a door, and I was his subordinate. His ego did not like it, not one bit. He threw a fit about it. Repeatedly. There were lots of other things he said. My favorite among them towards the end was him reprimanding me for my bad attitude in a meeting we'd just had. Inept manager had told me beforehand not to say anything during that meeting, because he was insisting on sharing incorrect information again and he knew I'd want to correct it, so I sat quietly and kept my eyes on the PowerPoint presentation or the floor nearly the whole time. When I asked him how I'd had a bad attitude when I hadn't said anything, as he'd requested, I didn't like the look on your face. Okay dude. After realizing there was nothing I could do to make this guy happy with my work and to lose his hostility, I finally went to HR to go on the record. I knew they'd do fuck all about it, but I wanted to document it at least. So predictably they told me to work harder at getting along with inept manager, and because it wasn't my first rodeo I went back to my office and emailed HR saying thanks for meeting with me about my concerns about inept manager. I fear his bias and misogyny will reflect negatively in my next performance review. HR should be aware that there is a real problem here and I hope you'll take steps etc. etc. Which, of course they didn't. But now it was on the record. 4. The axe falls. And then a few months later he gave me a terrible performance review, as expected. Long story already long, he was trying to fire me for underperformance. Unfortunately for me, the company had started rounds of layoffs all over and it was the worst possible time to be looking for another job internally. And now I had a bad performance review on my record, too. I went back to HR and said, that thing I said I was worried would happen when we met 6 months ago. That happened. Exactly as I said. Now what? HR, once again, was no help. Also they'd done literally nothing. But hey, it was on the record, again. Helpful for the attorney later. Blah blah blah. When I realized I couldn't find a new gig at my company because of all of the layoffs, sigh, I scored a new job for much more money at a different local tech company, and pretty quickly. I live in a tech-heavy area. There was lots of shuffling between 3 to 4 big companies during this time period, and we'd often bump into other company veterans at these other companies. It was a small world. With my track record and references it was super easy. After that was lined up, I called an employment discrimination attorney to negotiate my exit from the company I thought I'd work at until I retired. Sad face. Because I had documentation with HR explaining inept managers' misogyny and ableism going back for some time, and because they'd done fuck all about it, and because there were witnesses who confirmed his behavior, they had no leg to stand on. They agreed to write me a relatively nice check to go away and to not sue them, and I agreed to not talk about the details of my separation agreement. I went down to my lawyer's office and signed the agreement. I looked to see who had signed the agreement for the company. I assumed it would be someone in HR, but it was still blank. I'd eventually get a copy once someone there signed it. I took my check and packed up my office and left. Bye, old company. Sad face. I started my new job a few weeks later. 5. Karma begins. This was August of the year that I left. I got my copy of the executed contract in the mail in October. Who signed it for the company? Not HR, but my exec VP. The one who asked for the urgent, highly important, legally complicated project. The guy I looked in the eye personally, and then delivered on this very big thing he personally asked for, before the deadline he asked for. That is who signed off on my separation agreement. I suspect that he had no idea until that moment that I was gone, and I imagine that he likely had many questions about WTF had happened. And also, why did they have to pay me a chunk of money on the way out? Whoops. I chortled when I saw it. Since the VP knew me and we had some history, an inept manager was new to the division and was one of hundreds of middle managers he'd likely never heard of. I'm guessing inept manager had some explaining to do. Mwahahaha. I really enjoyed the thought of that. 6. Karma for Rails. Cut to November. As I mentioned, it was a relatively small tech community in the area, and those of us who worked in security, in particular at Company X, would often encounter other current former colleagues at Company Y or Z or whatever. Heck, there was a ton of poaching going on between the companies. One day I got an in-company chat from someone who'd worked in security at my old company. We'll call her security colleague. Security colleague asked me if I knew someone named inept manager. Why, yes. Yes, I did. Why? Because inept manager was appearing on security colleague's schedule to interview for an open management position the very next day. It seems that shortly after my former exec VP had signed my separation agreement contract, inept manager was actively looking for a new job at a new company. Heh. Security colleague asked me what I thought about inept manager. I said, you know, I can't really talk about it for legal reasons, which, boom, everyone knows what that means, but if you wanted to ring my personal cell phone later this evening to catch up on old times, please do. She did. I hypothetically shared some stories with her about inept manager. I also told her where his hot buttons are, the appearance ego thing, the dominant stuff, etc., etc. And all about his misogyny and ableism, which was perfect since SHE was conducting his interview. I may have shared some specific scenarios, questions to ask which I knew would set him off. I wished her luck, and for the love of all that is holy to please call me after, when appropriate, and tell me how it all went. It did not go well for inept manager. When security colleague rang me, I couldn't wait. How did it go? Well, he got combative and angry and yelled at me twice during his interview to be hired as a manager. Facepalm, there were lots more details, now lost to time. Except, at that company, interviews loops were assessed as such. Strong hire for this role. Hire, but not for this role, not a good fit for this job, but we like them. No hire. No hire ever, not for any role. Inept manager's interview was rated that last one, no hire ever. Blacklisted from ANY job, ever, at one of the biggest tech companies in the world. After being pushed out the door of one of the other biggest tech companies in the world. Derp. Shortly after that, it appeared that inept manager moved himself and his wife and kids a few states away to work at a smaller company in another region. It took less than 6 months from when I left my old company for him to be gone as well. Heh. What gets me still is that inept manager thought I was so inconsequential, so unimportant that he didn't bother to check and see where I landed after he forced me out of the company I loved. And when he had to look for a job himself shortly thereafter, it also never occurred to him that I'd have connections with, thousands of colleagues I'd worked with over the years, some of whom could now be working at company X or Y or Z where he was interviewing, and where I'd scored a huge raise for myself. To this day he doesn't know why his interview at company Y tanked so badly. And since security colleague was not legally precluded from sharing stories she had heard through the grapevine about inept managers' management problems, it's possible that other of our old security colleagues at Company Z and other companies in this area heard those stories, too. Which means he's unlikely to get a job at any major tech company in this area. Maybe ever. Definitely not at X or Y, and they are big companies. Among the biggest. And it's all because he's an asshole ableist misogynist middle manager who underestimated lil ol me. Mwah ha ha ha.
I had a member of staff, male, try to force himself onto another staff member, female. She chose not to press charges. That didn't sit right with me. To preface, I live in a country that employs a large foreign/expat workforce, in pretty much every industry and in all levels. For someone to move here for work, they have to be sponsored by a company or the individual that's employing them. I own and operate a small restaurant business here and employ more than a handful of foreigners as servers, cleaners, kitchen staff, drivers, etc. So here's the story. I was lounging on my couch enjoying the last of my weekend one day when I get a call from telling me that one of our sponsored employees, a server, let's call her Janice, was picked up for indecent exposure essentially. Long story short, she was caught hooking up with a guy in a private booth at a local restaurant. Basically, the police walked in on them whilst engaged in some seriously heavy petting. They were fully clothed, but the guy she was with, or practically on top of I should say, has his junk out. Turns out he works at the restaurant 2 doors down from where she worked. After a bit of chastising and threatening to escalate the situation and have them deported to sufficiently scare their senses back into them, they let them go, but not before signing a pledge-type document promising to never repeat the offense, or else, a slap on the wrist basically, and everyone got to go home, but it doesn't end there. That night something clicked in my brain and I had the thought, how and why did the police find them in a private booth in the back of a restaurant before the restaurant's own staff did? So I called the restaurant the next day. I thought maybe they called the police on them immediately for some reason. Or maybe the couple got belligerent when staff asked him to stop. Turns out the staff didn't notice a thing. In fact, up until that day, the police have never been to that restaurant before, and when they did, they simply walked in, went straight to the back booths where the two were sat, and busted right in. I realized this meant that someone must have seen them and called the cops on them point blank. The question was who? I decided to speak to Janice. I wanted to speak to her anyway that day, both to check in and get her version of the situation. I also gave her the employer you did something stupid chat and reassure her that she's keeping her job. I also wanted to ask her who she thought called her in. Without hesitation she said it had to be Sammy, who was one of our drivers. Why do you think it was Sammy? I asked. He's the one that dropped me off at the restaurant that day. He might have seen my friend walking right after me and called the police on us, she said. I knew the part of him dropping her off was true, that literally his job and her only free mode of transport. Well, that sounds a bit drastic. Why would he do that even if he had seen you do anything? I asked. She claimed it was because he was jealous. He was really into her apparently and kept trying to get her into bed, she said. What genuinely pissed me off was when she told me that he actually tried to force himself on her once and she fought him off, and that he hasn't tried or even said anything since other than be very short and curt with her. My immediate response was, why on earth would you not tell me or one of your managers right away? She said she had dealt with it her way, and it stopped. Plus she didn't want anybody to get fired on her account, and she didn't want any interaction with the authorities, so she decided not to make a big deal out of it in the first place. She also declined to press formal charges against him, which I advised her to do. Her declining infuriated me even more. This guy was going to get off scot-free. Now clearly I was about to fire Sammy, but in my mind that wasn't enough. For someone to attempt to rape a person basically and not get in trouble for it? Not okay with me. But it seemed like it was something I had to live with. Obviously, my next conversation of the day was with Sammy. My intent was to confront him with the accusations. I called him into my office. I didn't really know where to start, so I went with, "Obviously you've heard about what happened to Janice this weekend." He stepped in it right away. "Heard about it," came the unexpectedly proud response from a proud AF and positively beaming Sammy. I called it in. And this is where it started to get super satisfying. You see, for a couple of years since I met Sammy, every now and then he would pull out and show us all pictures of his wife, who was back home living with his mother. She was younger than him and quite beautiful, but sadly barren, which is apparently why she settled with an older fart like him. He was so proud of how pretty she was. He was also a devout religious man, or so he claimed. So I asked, "And why call the police?" He came back with, "After I dropped her off, I waited to see who she was meeting because she's a troublemaker woman. When I saw the man walking after her, I called police because I know him and he is married, and this is against the laws of God and man." I'm smiling now. I knew I got him. Why do that instead of calling your direct manager, or even me, and before even seeing for yourself what they were doing exactly at that? Why make it my problem and the company's problem what she does in her own time? Silence. Head down counting his shoes. "Sammy, I know why. I know what you did. Janice just told me. I'm disgusted by you and sorry that we hired you." He had the audacity to mumble, "I only tried once, sir." I almost slapped him. Anyways, I fired him, handed him a one-way ticket home, which was in 4 hours, and told him to GTFO. This is where I get my not-so-petty revenge. I had his house phone number saved somewhere from we hired him. It was on his CV. I knew that because I called him there to interview him before we first hired him. I waited until his flight took off and dialed the number. I assumed either his mother or wife would answer the call, but I was wishing for the latter. I got my wish. "Hello, Mrs. Sammy. I'm your husband's employer." Well, his former employer anyway. "Just so you know, I fired him a few hours ago and he's on a flight home as we speak. His flight number is XXXXX. He will be arriving at XXXX. Just so you are aware, I was forced to fire him because he attempted to rape a fellow employee half his age." "I'm sorry," I said, and promptly hung up, but not before hearing her gasping in shock.
"Former manager made my life hell and I finally got her fired. I was desperate to join a new job after my husband and I were both laid off last year. When I was offered a new role, I knew it would be a step down from what I was doing, but the manager and the team seemed great, and that part has not changed. However, since my manager Gary * was so busy, he basically offloaded me to another manager, Jane *. I was supposed to be the connection point between my team and Jane, but it quickly became Jane micromanaging me. She would ask me to work through lunch, move/cancel vacation days, call at 11 p.m. on weekends, and order me around on phone calls. She also made nasty comments about my weight and said I was big for my race. The list of personal slights so long that it filled 3 pages. I would talk back to her and she did not like that, and that provoked her more. I only stayed because we needed to pay the bills. Finally, I had a mental breakdown on a Friday afternoon, after she yelled at me for something trivial about scheduling a meeting without including someone from her team who I didn't know about. I was dealing with a family tragedy and couldn't take it anymore. I told Gary about the situation with Jane and he was sympathetic and not at all surprised considering half her team quit. He immediately offered to move me to a different team under him. I was thrilled. Well, turns out going to the new team didn't help. Jane continued to order me around from afar. When I ignored her emails, she came to my desk one day and started loudly talking about how I am not qualified for this role. Gary overheard and finally told her off, but the verbal abuse did not stop. After 2 months there, I abruptly wrote my resignation letter and stapled the list of Jane's offensive comments, and CC'd everyone. Gary offered a bunch of accommodations to try to keep me, but seeing how she was still provoking from afar, I said the only way for me to stay would be for her to go and he did not have authority to let her go. Her manager was in a different country, and despite several HR complaints from at least 5 people, nothing was done. So I left, loudly and without shame, telling everyone exactly why I was leaving. Times were very bad for 3 months. There were nights we would eat slices of bread just so we could pay the mortgage and emergency expenses from a health crisis and a funeral. Even after he found a job, we were still catching up on bills and still are. I spent months applying to 5 to 10 roles per day, sometimes over 20. Last month, I saw a public memo about a big shot from a former company joining the company I just left. I used to work with this guy closely and texted him a congrats, let me know if you need any insights on the new place. We had a quick call where I told him some ins and outs, where I thought they could innovate. After this call, he asked me to join the team as his chief of staff. I accepted. Imagine Jane's shock when we had our first all-hands call. All the VPs and above were asked to welcome the new Big Shot in a giant conference room. In Big Shot's speech, he breezed over that I'll be his chief of staff, along with a few key names. I now sat 2 levels above Jane, and apparently, within the 3 months I was not there, the other half of her team turned over. Every single person left. Gary was excited for me and said all nice things. However, Jane took the classless route and sent Big Shot an email about how I'm an unqualified idiot, that I used to work for her, how I tried to get her fired, and that she suspects I lied to get ahead. She didn't even try to be fake nice. Big Shot forwarded me her email and asked what this was about. I was so nervous and excited. Little did Jane know, I was a director at Big Shot's competitor company and was already a level above her, so 2 levels isn't a big leap, and I worked with him for 5 years. I had an hour call with Big Shot and told him she was bad for the company culture and was a nasty person in general, but the evidence he needed was Derry confirming that her whole team has turned over, my prior resignation letter which was still sitting on my desktop when I logged in upon return, and a few other nasty emails she sent her recent staff, which they were happy to share with us. Big Shot fired Jane on Friday.
How I got my boss's job and my coworkers a 15% raise. Hey Reddit, I can finally share my story because now it is all over. I am on mobile, also English isn't my mother language. And this is my first post ever on Reddit, so please be gentle, haha. And sorry for the long post. To the backstory. This all happened in an EU country, I don't say which one, sorry. I did my apprenticeship in a mid to big size factory as a machine operator. After I completed my apprenticeship, I worked in the production for around 1 month. Then I got called into the office and they asked me if I can do some holiday replacement, so I said yes, why not, better hours and clean work. I got teach the systems, which was pretty easy because I manufactured those parts for 1 year. After my coworker came back from their vacation, they asked me to stay and became a part of their team, so I said yes, sounds good. So I was now working in the sales/quality department. Now to the present time, 7 years later. Our team increased from 5 workers to 15 because of restructuring, which helped us a lot. My boss retired last fall. And after Christmas we got a new young boss around my age, 27, who was a major asshole and sexist. We got a few weeks before him a new hire, a lovely young girl, age 19, which I trained her. If you are new, you are doing some error, which is totally fine in my opinion. So I come in last Tuesday to hear my new boss screaming like a maniac at this young girl. I asked her what happened and she said she filled the wrong form, which happens even to me. My boss noticed it and screamed at her, I paraphrase it. Boss, you stupid little slut, who dumb can you be to fill out the wrong form? I should fire you and make sure that you never find any work in this field again. Coworkers started crying at this point. Then my boss stormed into his office and slammed the door shut. I asked my coworker if she's okay and she was still sobbing, so I brought her a coffee and took her to our office. Grandma, everyone loves here so much. I was at this point pretty pissed and told everyone what happened. After they learned what he did to our new coworker, 3 stormed into his office and quit after 25 years in this company. MX boss said to them that they are worthless and overpaid. They told us that and a plan was formed, everyone will quit except for me for now. What my boss didn't know yet is we had a huge customer audit happening in 3 weeks, which I am the only certified to prepare for. If we fail this, it would cost us 15 to 20 million euros and the customer would pull the contract. So after my boss learned that the whole department quit except for me, he was even more pissed. Boss, hey, why the hell did everyone quit? Me, maybe because you are asshole and a sexist pig. Boss, what did you just say, you asshole? Me, you know what I said, and do you remember the big audit in 3 weeks by customer X? Boss, yeah, what's about that? Me, you know that I am the only one certified to prepare it, right? Boss, yeah, and me, I quit Oswell because I do not want to work for such a asshole. Boss, see ya. And walked right out to my other coworkers to say goodbye in the whole factory. The production VP noticed it and asked what happened, so I told him and he was pissed. He called the CEO, which I knew pretty well, and said, Robert, the shit hit the fan big time, come down to the production floor now. The CEO asked if it's important and the VP said, if you want to pass the audit in 3 weeks then move your ass down here now. So the CEO came running down with the entire suits and asked what's so important. Then I piped up and said our whole department quit today and won't come back until this motherfucker of boss gets removed and fired. Then they asked what happens and we told them. They were mad and asked how they can fix it. I said fire him and hire a better fit. Because I held the most trainings and qualifications, they asked me, which I gladly said yes. So we took off to my new office with my old department and the CEO in tow. My boss saw me and said arrogantly, decided to came back and beg for your job back, you little R-word. Me, not just to inspect my new office, 'cause you are fired by now. He laughed and said that I am under him and only the CEO can fire him. So the CEO came around the little corner and said to my boss, get the fuck out of my company, you are fired, and I make sure that every company knows what you did. My ex-boss was white as a sheet. After that, the CEO called the police and reported him trespassing. In the end, I got a 70k raise and a bonus option, which I declined and asked if we can split it for my coworkers. I don't need that much money, 1 million euro worth of bonuses. My CEO agreed and everyone got their job back and we complete the audit without any fails. The customer was happy and so we are too.
Try to steal my legally rented parking spot? Enjoy being unemployed. This happened last night. I am now in a good enough spot to actually post this. I'm not quite sure if it qualifies as pro, but it definitely isn't petty. I am a professional driver. As such, on the roads in the US, there are different truck stops throughout the country that has a pay-to-park system, usually about 10 to 20% of the lot marked off as reserved, with each space running from $15 to $25. The truck stop where this took place had parking for $17, which is relatively cheap for a guaranteed spot. The spots are reserved for 24 hours, starting at 4 p.m. local time and extending to 3 p.m. the following afternoon. I knew that I would have a late-night delivery, so I came to the truck stop around 3:30 and paid for a reserved spot. I told the manager on duty that I had a delivery up the road that night and would be back once delivery was completed, but should still be able to clear out the spot by the next afternoon, today. She told me that this was okay, and she would mark the spot as sold when I left. That way, if someone else comes in trying to reserve that spot, she could consult her notes and deny the sale. 11:15 p.m. rolls around, I take off for my delivery. I don't get out of that facility until 2:30 a.m. the next morning, this morning. So, I groggily drive back to the truck stop to reclaim my paid-for spot, only to find that the reserved parking spaces are all full. I call the manager on duty, and after giving her my info, inform her that all the spots are full, and that someone is parked in a spot and hasn't paid for it. She sends her other employee out to start checking trucks. The culprit was from a company that is known for their bright orange trailers, and he was a company driver. The other employee starts banging on his door to inform him that he is parked illegally and he has to move. Meanwhile, I can see the commotion from my mirror, with my vantage point in the fuel island, where I had been instructed to temporarily park. The driver answers the door with a bottle of Heineken in one hand, and some sort of smoking implement in another. I know what it is, but for the sake of the mods, I'm not gonna say it. I decided to roll down the window to hear the commotion, and I hear the employee tell the driver to either move, or he will get the towing company and police involved. This driver is flat out irate that someone had the audacity to tell him where he can and cannot park, so he slams the door on the employee, threatening him. Employee calls the police and tow company, and the police show up first. I had worked for this company before, so I know their policies, and more importantly, what they can and cannot have in their trucks. Alcoholic beverages are not allowed in the cab. Anything that isn't a cigarette or a cigar and a lighter, also not allowed. The coup de grace, a pew-pew, of any kind, absolutely not allowed, and especially not allowed loaded. This driver had all that, and some other not-so-legal substances in his cab, so he was hauled away in cuffs. His truck was hauled away on a wrecker. I made a call after the commotion died down to the company safety director and informed them that their rig will be in an impound lot, and their driver is going to jail over the not-so-legal stuff he had in his truck. She thanked me and said that he will definitely lose his job, especially over the alcohol and the other not-so-legal stuff. I guess he played the screw around and find out card, and it bit him in his career.